Hello my dear viewers, I would like to thank you for watching the video, and I wanted to say subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be very grateful and you will not miss new videos. Enjoy the video. My name is Emily Carter. I've lived my entire life in a quiet corner of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At 32, I worked as a waitress in a dingy diner on the edge of town. My life was a cycle of long shifts, bad tips, and constant worrying about paying bills. The only excitement came from daydreams of escaping it all. But I never expected a dream like that to come true or to turn into a nightmare. It all started on a cloudy Thursday afternoon. I'd left work early because my manager, Stan, was unusually kind or just too hungover to care. I decided to take the long way home, cutting through the abandoned industrial district. It was risky, sure, but it shaved off 15 minutes. That's when I saw a battered duffel bag sitting in the middle of the road. I almost ignored it, but something about it caught my attention. Maybe it was the way it was perfectly zipped, or maybe I was just too curious for my own good. Either way, I stopped. The bag was heavier than I expected. I looked around, no cars, no people, just silence. My heart pounded as I unzipped it, and there it was, stacks and stacks of money, neatly bundled, unmarked bills. My hands trembled as I counted one bundle, $10,000. There had to be hundreds of them in there. $3 million. For a second, I felt like I was dreaming. My thoughts raced. Who does this belong to? Why is it here? Should I call the police? But then another thought crept in, louder than the rest. What if I keep it? I zipped the bag shut, hauled it over my shoulder, and practically ran home. My tiny apartment felt even smaller with that much cash inside it. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat staring at the bag. A voice in my head told me this money could change everything. No more struggling to pay rent, no more greasy diner shifts. I could finally be free, but as the excitement surged, so did the fear. Whoever left that money behind wouldn't just let it go. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend, Lisa. Hey, Em, drinks tonight? You deserve some fun. I almost laughed. Fun. I couldn't think about fun. I was sitting on a fortune that wasn't mine, and someone, somewhere, was probably looking for it. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining faceless men in suits knocking on my door, guns drawn. But I also pictured a new life, a life I'd always wanted. By morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going back to the diner. I wasn't going to struggle anymore. This money was mine now. But I had no idea how high the price would be. The first thing I did was quit my job. No notice, no explanation. I didn't care what Stan or my co-workers thought. For once, I wasn't worried about tomorrow. I rented a car cash, of course, and drove 3 hours out of Milwaukee to a small, no-name town. I checked into a cheap motel with the kind of anonymity I needed. Sitting on the scratchy motel bed, I spread the money out on the comforter, my fingers running over the crisp bills. It felt surreal. I couldn't spend it all at once. That would draw attention. So I started small. A new phone, better clothes, a decent haircut. I even splurged on a laptop to help me research how to invest without leaving a trail. But the paranoia was constant. Every shadow outside the motel window felt like someone watching. Every knock at the door made my stomach flip. I'd scan the news obsessively, looking for any mention of missing cash or unsolved crimes. Nothing came up. Then I made my first big move. I rented a cozy little house on the outskirts of Chicago under a fake name. The realtor didn't bat an eye when I handed over 6 months' rent in advance. For the first time in years, I felt free. I wasn't scraping by or worrying about bills. I spent my days shopping, eating at fancy restaurants, and imagining this was how life was meant to be. But things didn't stay perfect for long. It started with a phone call. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. The message was short and chilling. "We know you have the money, Emily. You can't hide forever." My blood ran cold. How did they find me? I thought I'd been so careful. I changed my phone, moved cities, even used cash for everything. Panic set in. I packed a bag, grabbed the duffel, and drove out of town without a plan. I found another motel, this one even more rundown than the last, and holed up there. That night, I got another call. This time, I answered. "You're in over your head," a deep voice said. "That money doesn't belong to you." "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's not important. What matters is that you give it back. If you don't, things will get unpleasant." The call disconnected. My hands shook as I clutched the phone. The next morning, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street from the motel. It didn't move for hours. When I finally mustered the courage to leave, the driver's eyes followed me. They had found me. I realized then that the money wasn't a blessing, it was a curse. And I was in far deeper than I ever thought possible, but I wasn't giving up, not yet. This was my chance to change my life, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me. The SUV was still there when I returned to the motel that evening. The driver had sunglasses on, even though the sun was setting. He didn't try to approach me, but his presence spoke volumes. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made me jump. My heart raced every time I imagined them bursting through the door. By sunrise, I had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. I had to disappear again, this time for good. I drove to a big box store a few towns over, keeping an eye on my rearview mirror the entire way. Once inside, I bought supplies, hair dye, a cheap burner phone, and a backpack to replace the duffel bag. I couldn't keep carrying that bag around. It was too obvious, too suspicious. I dyed my hair that night, turning my chestnut brown locks into a muted blonde. Staring at my reflection in the motel bathroom, I barely recognized myself. Good, that was the point. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. These people, whoever they were, had resources. They'd found me once, they'd find me again. The next day, I withdrew cash in small increments from a team scattered across 3 different cities, always keeping my head low and my eyes scanning the surroundings. By the time I finished, I had about $20,000 in smaller bills packed into my new backpack, the rest of the money. I couldn't risk carrying it all. I stuffed the duffel into a storage locker at a train station in Chicago and memorized the key's serial number before tossing it in a river. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe that would throw them off. Maybe I could finally catch my breath. I was wrong. Later that night, as I sat in a dingy diner trying to eat, a man slid into the booth across from me. He was tall, with a shaved head and a leather jacket that screamed trouble. "Emily," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. My heart dropped. I didn't know this man, but he knew me. "Wrong person," I said, trying to sound indifferent. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't insult my intelligence." You've made this harder than it needs to be. You've got one last chance to return the money." "I don't have it," I lied, my voice trembling. His expression darkened. "You've got 2 days to get it back. After that, well, let's just say you won't like the consequences." He stood and left as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving me frozen in the booth. My appetite was gone. 2 days. They weren't going to stop, and now I had a deadline. I spent the next 24 hours trying to think of a way out. The money was my lifeline, but holding on to it felt like clutching a ticking time bomb. I thought about running again, but where would I go? They'd always find me. Then an idea came to me, a dangerous, desperate idea. If they wanted their money so badly, I'd give it to them. On my terms. It was time to turn the tables. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I planned. If they wanted the money, I'd make them work for it, and I'd use the time to get as far away as possible. The first step was reclaiming the duffel bag from the storage locker. Early the next morning, I drove to the train station in Chicago, parking a few blocks away to avoid drawing attention. My hands trembled as I unlocked the storage unit, the sight of the money still sending a rush of adrenaline through me. With the bag slung over my shoulder, I headed to a library across town. Libraries, I'd learned, were one of the few places where you could still use a computer without leaving a trace. From there, I set up a burner email account and sent a message to the man who'd confronted me at the diner. His contact info was scrawled on a card he'd slipped into my hand before he left. The email was simple. "If you want your money, meet me at the parking lot on 8th and Wabash at midnight. Come alone, no tricks." It was a bluff, of course. I had no intention of showing up, but I needed them distracted. By the time I hit send, I was already heading to the next part of my plan. At a hardware store, I bought a cheap prepaid phone, duct tape, and an assortment of basic tools. By evening, I was parked in an abandoned industrial area on the edge of town. Using the tools, I broke into an old storage shed and stashed the duffel bag inside. It wasn't perfect, but it was far enough off the grid to buy me time. Then I prepared the bait. From the cash I'd withdrawn earlier, I packed a second bag with a fraction of the money, just enough to make it seem like the real deal. I left it in the parking lot at 8th and Wabash, tucking the burner phone inside with one of its many duplicate keys. When midnight came, I wasn't there to see what happened. I was parked miles away, sitting in another dingy motel room, waiting for the phone to buzz. It didn't take long. "You think this is a game?" the text read. "You're going to regret this." I smiled grimly. Let them regret it. I wasn't about to hand over the money or myself on a silver platter. The next day, things escalated. As I drove through a quiet residential street, a black SUV roared up behind me, tailing me dangerously close. My pulse spiked as I made a sharp turn, then another, weaving through side streets. No matter how many corners I took, they stayed right on my bumper. In a panic, I sped into a crowded shopping plaza and jumped out of the car, leaving it running. I darted through the crowd, weaving between people, my heart pounding in my chest. I made it into a department store and slipped into the dressing rooms, crouching behind the curtains. Minutes passed, and no one came after me. When I finally peeked out, the SUV was gone. That night, another text came through. "Tick-tock, Emily, time's running out." I was running out of options. They were closing in, and I couldn't keep running forever. Then it hit me. There was one place I could go, one place where they wouldn't dare follow: the police. But if I went to the cops, I'd lose everything: the money, my freedom, my chance at a new life. I stared at the phone, weighing my options. Was the money worth risking my life for? I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing: I was running out of time. The decision haunted me all night. Turning the money over to the police would mean giving up the life I'd barely begun to taste. But keeping it meant I'd be looking over my shoulder forever. The clock was ticking, and I knew I couldn't delay any longer. By morning, I made up my mind. I wasn't handing over the money, at least not yet. If I was going down, I was going down on my terms. The first step was drawing them out. I used the burner phone to send another email to the man from the diner. I'm ready to make a deal. Tonight, 10 p.m. Pier 31. You get your money and I disappear. No cops, no games? Pier 31 was an abandoned shipping dock, a perfect place for an exchange or an ambush. I knew they wouldn't come alone, and neither would I. That evening, I arrived early, hiding in the shadows with the duffel bag beside me. I'd chosen my position carefully, overlooking the pier from a rusted catwalk. It gave me a clear view of the area while keeping me out of sight. At exactly 10 p.m. the black SUV rolled up. Two men stepped out. One was the man from the diner, the other a towering brute with a shaved head and a menacing glare. "Emily," the diner man called out, his voice echoing across the empty dock. "We know you're here. Let's end this." I stayed silent, watching as they scanned the area. The duffel bag was in plain sight, sitting on the ground in the middle of the pier. The brute moved to pick it up, but the diner man stopped him. "Wait. It's too easy. Smart. Too bad it wouldn't help them." With trembling hands, I pulled out the second burner phone and hit the button I'd programmed earlier. The duffel bag exploded, not a real explosion, but a brilliant burst of fireworks I'd stuffed inside. Sparks flew, and the men ducked, shouting in surprise. I seized the moment. From the catwalk, I shouted, "This is the last warning. Back off, or next time it won't be fireworks." The diner man looked up, his face twisted in anger. "You're making a big mistake, Emily. I'm done playing games," I yelled. "You follow me again, and I'll burn every last cent. Tell your boss that." For a moment, they hesitated. Then, without a word, they turned and got back in the SUV. The message had been sent. I didn't wait around to see if they'd return. I grabbed the real duffel bag from its hiding spot under the catwalk and slipped away into the night. My heart raced as I drove out of town, the adrenaline making my hands shake on the wheel. I didn't know if my stunt had worked or if they'd be back. But for now, I had a head start, and I wasn't about to waste it. 2 weeks later, I was in a small beachside town in Oregon, living under a new name. The money had bought me freedom, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. Paranoia lingered, and I always kept a packed bag by the door ready to run. Some nights, I wondered if I'd made the right choice. The money had given me a new life, but it had also painted a target on my back. But as I sat on the quiet beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, I couldn't help but think that, for now, I was free. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth the risk, or so I thought. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos.